Hello and welcome to the first lesson of Islam beliefs and teachings. Today we are going to be looking at Allah and the Prophet. So before we get in, we need to understand who exactly Allah is, and that would be the Arabic name for God. Okay, so I'll give you a second to get that definition written down. But we're going to look at this quotation here. It says, "He is God, the One, the Absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none comparable to him." We need to have a minute to actually break down exactly what it is that quotation means. It's already telling us a lot about some of his characteristics. One of those characteristics then is this concept of Tawheed. And when we look back at this quotation, we see that there are two main sections which is promoting this concept. The first one being this idea that the One, the Absolute, this idea that there's only one God, there's absolutely nothing even close to. And then you see in that second section there is nothing comparable to him. It means that there is literally nothing that is on the same level as Allah in terms of importance for Islamic belief. Now, very quickly, just to double check that we have understood those ideas, can we very quickly just write down what was the word for the oneness and unity of Allah, and who was Allah? I'll give you until 3, 2, 1. Hopefully we were happy with the idea that this was the word Tawheed, and Allah was just the Arabic name for God. Give yourself a tick if you got those right. If you didn't, make sure that you add in those corrections as well so that you have perfect notes whenever you're looking back over them. Now, with Allah, one of the big things is that they have many, many names. In fact, according to Muslims, there are 99 different names. Now, these aren't just normal names that you would give to your children or your friends or your family. These are names that purely describe their characteristics. So when describing Allah, you might say that he is the Mighty One or the Great Forgiver. Here are just a few more of some of those 99 names that Muslims will refer to Allah with. So I'll give you a second to write down a couple of those. We'll be moving on in 3, 2, and 1. When looking at these three in particular, we might notice something. This idea of being mighty, another word for mighty would be powerful. Loving, you might say, is benevolent. And watchful one, you might suggest if they see everything, they're going to know everything. Very quickly, what are the three words that describe God being all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing? I'll give you a second to write those down as a little test for yourself. If you've watched some of the Christianity lessons, these are words that you may be comfortable with. In 3, 2, and 1. It is the mighty one is omnipotent, the loving one omnibenevolent, and the watchful one omniscient. So that's a really useful little tip there, guys. You have an opportunity to recycle some of your terminology from Christianity, and you can put that straight back into Islam. Those words are just as relevant in this religion as they are in Christianity. So now we understand who God is. Allah is this being that is all-powerful, all-knowing, is the only one that exists within Islam. But the one thing that we need to know about Allah is that he does not have the capability necessarily to be able to communicate directly with humans. So therefore he needs a prophet, someone who is a messenger of God. I'll give you a second to write down some of these examples. In total, there are 25 named in the Quran. I've given you a list here of some of the most important ones, some of the names you might recognize from Christianity. So I'll give you a moment to write those down. I'll be continuing in 3, 2, and 1. Now these prophets, they have two main jobs. Now obviously the most important one is to spread God's message to those who might have forgotten it, to those who might have changed it, to those who might be unsure on its exact meaning. The prophets would go and they would spread those messages, and in fact it's described in the Quran as there being a prophet for every nation, meaning that God's message has the availability to reach everybody. But the second most important role of a prophet is to be a role model, to demonstrate not just what these teachings are, but how they look in practice. When you have instructions, sometimes just reading them once isn't going to help you understand exactly what it is you need to do. Sometimes you need to see how somebody goes about actually doing those instructions and following them carefully for you to be able to fully understand exactly what it is that you're being asked to do. Now going to look at three examples of prophets. We're looking at Adam, Ibrahim, and Muhammad. And the first prophet we're going to look at is obviously Adam. Now, the story between Adam in Islam and Adam in Christianity is not all too dissimilar. He does indeed disobey Allah by by eating that forbidden fruit from that one tree that he was not supposed to eat from. But he did so anyway after being tempted by Hawa, who is the Islamic version of Eve in this story. And in this moment, then he realizes that he's done something wrong. He has disobeyed his instructions from God. So actually, when Allah appears to communicate with Adam, begs, for Allah not to punish them. And in this case, Allah does not punish them. In fact, he forgives them. And then what he does is he sends them down to earth to spread his message. Because that's the other big difference in this story, guys. Adam and Hawa existed in the Garden of Bliss, which is not believed to be a place here on earth. This is supposed to be a part of heaven, effectively, and they got sent down to earth to then deliver those first few messages to human beings. So they were slightly more important than some of the other prophets, just because they existed outside of earth first. But how does this help? Here's a quote then from the Quran, and it says, he accepted his repentance. It's talking about God accepting those who are sorry for the things that they've done wrong, and they actively try to change their lives. So for many people, Adam is a crucial prophet because he was a role model. He demonstrates exactly what they need to do when asking for forgiveness, and then when asking to make sure that their lives are protected by God as well. Now, this does mean that the big difference here at the end of the stories between Islam and Christianity is that in Islam, there's no original sin. So that's why there's no need for baptism in Islam, because there's no sin necessarily to be washing away. We then get on to looking at Ibrahim. Now, for those of you who don't know the story of Ibrahim, it's quite a shocking one. Ibrahim was asked to do something very challenging by Allah, and that was to sacrifice his son. Now, for some context, that son was one that he waited many, many years for, and decided that when asked to do this by God, that he would say yes. Ibrahim took his son up Mount Arafat, where he spoke to Ishmael and said, this is what we need to do. I need to sacrifice you because Allah has asked me to do so. Now, on their journey, they actually tried to get stopped by Shaitan, their Islamic equivalent of Satan. And in this moment, Satan appears and says, no, don't kill your son. What are you doing? It appears that Satan is doing something positive. He's trying to protect Ibrahim's son. But in fact, what he's actually trying to do is dissuade Ibrahim from actually following God's instructions. Now, when Ibrahim gets to the top of Mount Arafat and is about to go through with sacrificing his son, the whole thing is stopped by God. It was clear that this was a test of loyalty. Now, in some stories, God does not stop Ibrahim at all, and it's just a case of Ibrahim stabs down through the body that is in front of him, but Allah has swapped that body with a ram. So depending on the story that you've been taught at school, that's the one that you should focus on. Different Muslims will believe slightly different things because this is something that happened way before their time. Now, as a result of Ibrahim's loyalty, it says here in the Quran that Allah took Ibrahim as an intimate friend. This idea that they were very close because of how loyal Ibrahim was to Allah. Now, this is important because for many Muslims, then, they're going to be shown the power of loyalty. If Ibrahim was as loyal as he was to Allah, that's why he was able to get his position as being called a friend of God. Muslims around the world are going to want to have that same opportunity, the same level of loyalty as Ibrahim had. That's going to be a goal for them to try and achieve. Then finally, we come on to the Prophet Muhammad. Now, Muhammad was arguably the most important prophet. Now, he was visited by Angel Jibril whilst praying in Mount Hira. Now, he did this because the community that he lived in were filled with polytheists. They were people who believed in multiple gods and were worshipping idols. But whilst praying in this cave, Angel Jibril appeared to him and gave him this first revelation, this first message from God that had been revealed to him. And whilst he then gathered more of these revelations over a span of 20 years, he started growing the Muslim community. Now, this meant that they faced a level of persecution, which is when groups of people who are treated badly because of the fact they belong to that group. Now, this group in question was Islam. So these Muslims were being persecuted, being threatened, and in fact, they even attempted to kill Muhammad. Now, after his escape to Medina, he was able to raise an army of 10,000 Muslims to reclaim the city of Mecca, which we now know to be in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Now, as a result of this victory, Muhammad decided he would destroy all of the idols in the Grand Mosque, which was surrounding the Kaaba. Now, he circled the Kaaba 7 times to destroy in total 360 idols. That was one idol for every degree of that circular motion around the Kaaba. Now, we see here that Muhammad is referred to as the seal of the prophets. And part of the reason why this is the case is because he had delivered the final messages that were needed. There was no need for retranslation, no need for re-explaining. All of the instructions that could possibly ever be needed by humanity had now been given. Imagine you had a jigsaw puzzle, 100 pieces, but you'd only completed 99 of them. Once you add that last jigsaw puzzle piece in, there's no room for anything else. You have the complete picture. Muhammad was that final jigsaw piece, that final bit of information that allowed Muslims to understand exactly how to be a Muslim. So we then have to look at some of these influence questions. And here is 2 examples that you could give. First of all, you could mention Adam in your answer, saying how he demonstrated asking for forgiveness. And the big influence, therefore, is that Muslims are going to ask Allah for forgiveness from their own sins. They know that it worked for Adam, so they're going to want it for themselves. Another way you could do this is by talking about Muhammad and the fact that he demonstrated the importance of believing in Tawheed, that belief in the oneness and unity of God, and he did that by destroying all of the idols. Now, what does this influence Muslims to do? They're only going to worship Allah. They're not going to worship anything else. They're not going to believe in anything else. Now, what you've noticed is that there's been no pictures of Allah or the prophets in this, whereas in Christianity you tend to see pictures of God or you see pictures of Jesus. Now, part of the reason for this is because it is considered the sin of shirk, and this is the worship of false idols. Now, you might be wondering, why does that include Allah and the prophets? Well, nobody knows what Allah looks like. Nobody knows what the prophets look like. No one's alive from their timeline. So how are we ever going to know accurately what they look like? If we then have a picture of those beings that is completely inaccurate, it could be considered offensive. But also there might be a temptation here. You might be tempted to draw these images, and when you have them, that's your focal point of your prayer. That's the focal point of your worship. Now, if these images are inaccurate because we are incapable of knowing what an accurate version of them would look like, we are worshipping then a false idol. It is an image of a completely separate being which you are now worshipping. So the sin of shirk is one of the only sins that is known as the unforgivable sin. In fact, if you do not repent for this sin almost immediately, it will be nearly impossible for you to reach heaven. It will be impossible for you to reach the Islamic version of that, which is Jannah, which we will look at next lesson. As a result of these images not being allowed within Islam, you'll notice that these pictures of the mosque here, they have no images of people. It's all intricate patterns and designs demonstrating the importance of not looking at individuals when you worship, because the only being you should worship is God. So that just goes to show how important they view Allah and the prophets are, because they're not willing to disrespect them by drawing images of something that was going to be completely inaccurate. Now, as always, we have to look at the 12 mark. questions. And that first 12-mark question that we are going to look at today is the following. The belief in the prophets is the most important Muslim belief. Now, you've seen here that I've included 3 quotations for the agree side and only 2 for the disagree side. If you remember from the previous lessons that we've done, it doesn't have to be a balanced argument. Now, in this case, I'm going to suggest that the strongest argument should be the agree side, the belief in the prophets. And now, although this may not be an accurate belief, this is an opinion-based question. The exam markers do not mind what your opinion is as long as you follow the correct criteria. Now, the fact is we have more information on the prophets than we do Allah. So you can actually use that as part of your evaluation. Although believing in God is an important belief, it is harder to believe in God because you can't understand him. He is beyond human capability of thought. What I've done is I've given you these quotations which you can then pull points from. You've got the 3 prophets that you could talk about in that paragraph, whereas you've got the concept of Tawheed in the disagree side. Now, if you wanted to put this into a paragraph, you could have something like this. Some Muslims would correctly suggest the belief in prophets is the most important because they demonstrate the important qualities like loyalty. Now, if this was going to be your point, the prophet that you're most likely to use, therefore, is going to be Ibrahim. So we're going to look at this quotation here and again correctly referencing where it's from. After we've given our evidence, we need to link that back to the point by giving some level of explanation. So here I have explained it in full detail. And finally, I have given an evaluative sentence. This is then a perfect point evidence explained evaluate, which you could use in your own argument. Now, this is only part of a paragraph. This is only 1/3 of your agree side. So you would need to do this at least 2 more times. What I would say is that the evaluation only needs to be done at the end of the paragraph, but I thought I would still give it to you so that you have the opportunity to add that into the end of your paragraph, helping you then to go on to your second paragraph, which should be a little bit shorter. Remember, you must include a conclusion in your answer. You have to reach a justified conclusion, otherwise you cannot get into that top band of exam marking. That is it. That is first lesson on Islam completed. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you need to know? Have a go at this question yourself. Send everything you have over to me, whether it be questions, exam answers that you have done, whatever it may be, send it my way and I can give you some feedback or some extra information on anything that we have done in today's lesson. Thank you very much, guys, and I will see you in the next lesson of Islam Beliefs and Teachings.